am David Dodge. Welcome to Green Energy Futures. Alberta just hit the unpause button when it comes to its moratorium on renewable energy projects. But will the unpause resume the boom in renewable energy investment or drop a poison pill on the industry? We wanted to know what's changed and how it will impact the industry in Alberta.
Hi, I'm Sara Hastings-Simon. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Earth, Energy and Environment and the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary. So this was the end of a moratorium on the granting of permission for renewable energy projects. And the province also announced a set of new rules, although I would say it was more like describing the rules than really announcing fully fleshed rules. So there's still some details to be worked out. So we do know the outlines of some of those rules, and there's sort of three big buckets of new rules, and then there was some hinting at further conversations to come. But the three big areas of new rules are, one is around land use and prohibition of projects that don't allow for continued agricultural use on Class 1 and Class 2 lands. The second is about locating projects near what the province is calling pristine viewscapes and protected areas. A lot of questions there, but basically saying, that there's going to be some controls about how close they can be placed to various things like protected areas. And then the third was around reclamation, so requirements for securities or bonding. Again, there not a lot of details on exactly how that will work.
In the big picture, everyone agrees that Alberta is lagging in regulating the energy industry, as evidenced by the estimated $33 billion in liability for oil well cleanup.
I think that it's fair to say that in Alberta, we have not done a good job of regulating our energy industry. We have massive outstanding liabilities that we know of within, say, the conventional oil and gas sector. We have problems of orphaned wells. And these were all things that the province and the government sort of hinted at when they talked about the reason for doing this. I look at what's come out now, and it feels like this is less of a, let's regulate industry overall and more of a sort of direct constraints and prohibitive constraints being placed on one specific sector within energy, that being renewables.
New proposed rules aim at protecting agricultural land. Development is to be prohibited on classes 1 and 2 agricultural lands. Hastings-Simon actually did a study on the impact of renewables on agricultural land.
On a total agricultural land availability measure, we're talking about solar, in some kind of 2035 future of less than 0.1% of the agricultural land that we have overall. As far as I'm aware, we haven't seen any renewable projects being developed on Class 1 land. And I think that's a reflection of, these are projects landowners get to choose whether or not they want to enter into a contract and whether or not they want to host these projects on their land. The Class 2 land, which is, slightly less suitable, but still considered good for crop growing with irrigation, is the one where I think this gets a little bit trickier. Of the existing solar projects that we have, it seems that about 15% are on this type of land.
Droughts in southern Alberta mean water for irrigation is becoming scarcer every year. In hard times, Hastings-Simon worries about the rules limiting the choices of farmers for developing their land. Liabilities and reclamation was the second area cited for the pause.
A wind farm, while you may need to take down the turbines, is still located in a good place that still has a good wind resource. The resource is still there. The transmission connection would still be there. And so there would be a big incentive to basically, reinvest. And as part of that reinvestment, do the decommissioning of projects. And that's very different from an oil well or gas well where it might just not be producing very much anymore. And so again, having these rules in place, I think as long as they're part of a broader reformation of the reclamation project is a good thing for Albertans. But if it's done purely for the renewable sector while we leave the rest of the energy sector alone, it's really best understood as more of a sort of punitive kind of targeting of that sector.
Planning for reclamation is a good thing. But the best solution for an aging wind or solar farm is to replace aging infrastructure with more efficient modules or turbines to increase revenue from a resource that's still there. There's been much talk about renewable energy being intermittent and unreliable. But Hastings-Simon says renewable energy is not unreliable, it's variable.
It comes, I think, as no surprise to anybody that the sun goes down at the end of the day, and the renewable energy industry is well aware of this. When we talk about the role that renewables have to play in a reliable, resilient, and efficient electricity grid, in some of my research, we find that, you could reach a grid that is 60 or even 70% renewables on an annual basis at a really cost-effective level.
Renewable energy is cheaper, and the solutions to use it to create a strong and resilient grid are well known.
But we really need to think about planning our grid and what are all of those elements, that combination of dispatchable resources still for some time, but renewables, storage, demand response, and transmission interconnection. And that's what's going to give us a reliable electricity.
One study by Energy Storage Canada found that given the grid conditions in 2022 in Alberta, the addition of just one 300-megawatt energy storage project could have saved Albertans $600 million on electricity. Hastings-Simon says because we're not focusing on these changes that are needed, people are going to pay more than they should for electricity. The last change coming could create massive no-go zones for renewable energy in Alberta. The province says it wants to protect so-called pristine viewscapes and keep renewable energy 35 kilometers from protected areas.
Depending how that's interpreted, if you just take kind of today's protected areas, it looks like that will be up to 3/4, for example, of the land in southern Alberta where you would expect to see a lot of wind and solar developed will be off limits. So if it was implemented in sort of the broadest sense, where you took, all the designated protected areas and drew those buffer zones and added in, the ability for people to designate additional viewscapes, I think it would rise to the level of a poison pill.
This despite the fact that there are thousands of oil and gas wells that occupy every viewscape in Alberta and even exist inside protected areas. Hastings-Simon says the restrictions amount to a poison pill for the renewable energy industry. Prior to the moratorium, the industry was poised to bring $33 billion in investment to Alberta. So, has the moratorium already affected investment, and will these new yet-to-be-defined rules hurt investment in Alberta?
It's impossible to imagine that this won't have an impact on investment. And so I think until we get some more certainty about these rules and how the rules will be applied, we may not have a moratorium on projects that have applied, but we'll have a de facto moratorium on people making investments to develop new projects.
There are already news reports of renewable energy companies putting a hold on projects in Alberta and looking elsewhere.
If we think about something like red tape reduction, which has also been a big push from this government, getting into the minutia of what an individual landowner, what kind of resources they're allowed to develop on their land, that strikes me as much more adding of red tape. So it does seem again like this specific industry is being singled out in a way that's very different from other industries.
The devil may be in the details, but it's hard not to interpret this as an assault on the renewable energy industry in Alberta. And companies are already pulling the plug on planning for future projects and looking elsewhere. Many of the rules and regulations need to be fleshed out, so time will tell. Learn more in our blog at GreenEnergyFutures.ca. For Green Energy Futures, I'm David Dodge.